Chapter 1. The Casus Belli. For many years, a great political strife had been gradually undermining the ties of tradition and mutual interest betwixt North and South. The rival sections had fought side by side in conquering our independence and in maintaining it. Every reason, commercial and national, should have held us together. The slighter differences of opinion had been mainly about tariff protection to the northern manufacturers and kindred financial subjects. Differences like these could scarcely have involved serious results. The real cause of the growing animosity was associated with the questions attending slavery. With whatever unanimity, servile labor may now be condemned as a social and commercial mistake, leaving its moral aspect entirely out of the question. The institution of slavery in the decade preceding the war was asserted by the Southern states to be the keystone of their success, in the same measure that paid labor was held in the North to have built up the wealth of its manufacturing communities and to have opened the wheat fields of the West. The difference in climate and products yielded each section abundant sources of argument for its own peculiar views. But the matter did not stop at discussion. The South, to acquire additional political power, desired to extend the institution into the rapidly growing territories of the Union. The North, for similar reasons, desired to have it excluded from all but those states where it had taken such firm root that it could not be extirpated without too great upheaval. There was, of course, in each section a minority of very bitter opponents and favorers of slavery, whose extreme utterances and acts bred more or less ill feeling. But the general question was confined to the territorial extension or restriction of slave labor. For many years, the pro-slavery men North and South had held possession of the reins of government. But the party of free labor, owing to immigration, which preferably sought the northern and western states, was thought to be on the point of dispossessing them. The Republican Party, which desired to restrict slavery to the limits it already occupied, existed mostly in the North. The Democrats of the South wished to extend slavery. Their political allies in the northern states aimed to prevent rupture by concessions to the Southern idea. In 1860, a new president had to be chosen. The Democrats North and South outnumbered the Republicans. If they worked together, they could scarcely fail to elect their candidate. But the Southern Democrats demanded a platform which should recognize both slavery as a national institution and the right of secession. This latter was no new doctrine. Secession had been threatened before, and the abstract right of a state to rupture its relations with the Union had been stoutly maintained and denied on the one and the other side. The demands of the Southern wing led to a breach in the Democratic Party, the result of which was that 4 presidential candidates came into the field, 2 Democrats, Douglas representing the North and Breckinridge the South, a Whig, Bell, representing the party of concession, and a Republican, Lincoln. Out of nearly 4,700,000 votes, Mr. Lincoln received 1,700,000. This fell short of an actual majority, but was much more than any other candidate received, and the usual machinery of election gave the Republican candidate the suffrages of the Electoral College. He was legally chosen president. Still, despite their defeat, the Democrats would retain a majority in Congress and could assert their rights in ample measure, but this power was not ample enough. The ultramen among the Southern leaders determined upon actual secession as a remedy, hoping to retrieve by threats of force what they had lost by their political rupture with the Northern democracy. Many opposed this course, but in vain. The passions of the Southern people were at fever heat. Secession measures were at once put in play, and as the national administration, until the succeeding March, was still democratic, the South reaped many advantages from the weakness, and in some instances outright dishonesty of United States officials. Compromises were attempted, but matters had gone too far. Before New Year of 1861 had dawned, South Carolina had set up as an independent power. The other Southern states, in turn, passed ordinances of secession. A confederacy was formed, and North and South were openly arrayed against each other. But it must be remembered that while slavery had been at the root of the trouble, the actual casus belli was the act of secession, to maintain and to prevent which our Civil War was really waged. As the struggle grew in intensity, the final extirpation of slavery became an element in the calculations of the North, and even a means of encouraging its people. But at the outset, the contest was solely a war for the Union. Chapter 2. The Opening Situation. A bird's-eye view of our Civil War shows a threefold division of military operations. The mightier conflicts had their scene in the states bordering on the east or on the west of the Allegheny Mountains. Most minor hostilities were waged on the outskirts of the Confederacy. Many of the latter had so little, if any, bearing upon the general result, that they may be briefly dismissed from sight without affecting an intelligent view of the whole. Some bore a weighty share in our eventual success. It will be remembered that, in a general way, the offensive was the defensive the Confederate share of the struggle. But as the best defense is often a vigorous attack, so the Confederates waged sometimes an offensive-defensive warfare, as in the case of Lee's incursions across the Potomac in 1862 and 1863, or Bragg's march to the Ohio River in 1862. But the general policy pursued by the Confederates was formulated by Jefferson Davis when he said that all we ask is to be let alone. In the East, the two rival capitals faced each other at no great interval, and were hungrily fought for over the narrow territory lying between them. Here, too, was the great Confederate captain, and under him served the elite of the Southern legions. In the West, there was no such topographical limitation. The possession of the Mississippi River was our primary objective, both as a base for operations into the interior and to cut off from the enemy the supplies he gathered from beyond. The outskirt operations consisted mostly of lodgments on the coast, which were not utilized to any greater extent than to keep the blockade of the southern ports intact. Munitions of war were the prime necessity of the secessionists. Within the boundaries of each state, there had at various times been granted to the national government certain small tracts of land for forts, arsenals, and navy yards. These had been kept more or less liberally supplied with arms, ammunition, and stores of all kinds. A large part of this material fell into the hands of the seceding states. It was claimed that the act of secession revested in each state the title to the land so granted to the government, and, wherever possible, the claim was made good by taking possession of this national property. In some instances, the garrisons of the forts held their own, and preserved these coins of vantage to the United States. South Carolina had been the most prominent state in warlike activity. But the forts in Charleston Harbor were still in possession of the national government and under command of Major Anderson. Without these citadels, the newborn power of South Carolina would be unable to control the entrance to its only seaport. After the act of secession, therefore, negotiations were opened with President Buchanan for yielding up their possession. Vacillating though he was, the president could not consent to this. He prolonged the discussion. Anderson, with soldierly decision, cut the knot of the difficult by abandoning the shore fortresses and transferring his small force of 128 men to Fort Sumter in the center of the harbor, prepared to hold it to the last. Months elapsed in inaction. Anderson's commissariat began to fail. Attempts were made by the president to revictual the fort, but they were unsuccessful. Finally, South Carolina struck the blow. Always a leader in the South, she now had at her back the moral support of the other seceding states. After summoning Fort Sumter to surrender, fire was opened upon it from the rehabilitated United States forts and from shore batteries erected during the interregnum of 3 months. A bloodless bombardment of 2 days resulted in a conflagration which, added to the exhaustion of his ammunition, obliged Anderson to capitulate. This he did, and marching out with all the honors of war, he embarked his troops for the North. This first act of war was, however, more a political than a military combat. The Northern people had until this moment disbelieved in a final rupture, but their eyes were now opened, and Fort Sumter was the signal for an universal uprising to avenge the insult to the national flag. President Lincoln at once issued a call for volunteers. The response was unmistakable in its intensity. The busy merchant, the plodding farmer, the mechanic, and the professional man. Each dropped his avocation to enter the ranks, and, as if by magic, the peaceful North became one vast camp. In the South, preparations were much further advanced, but recruitment was no more speedy. Both sides donned their armor for the now inevitable fray. The Navy Yard at Norfolk contained much material of war sadly needed at the South. By a series of blunders, this valuable possession was allowed to fall into the hands of the new Confederacy, much to our discomfiture and eventual danger. Harper's Ferry, too, an arsenal containing the most necessary machinery for producing arms and ammunition owned by the United States, was evacuated and destroyed by its garrison. The city of Washington stood in no little peril. A vigorous raid from Virginia could readily have seized the capital at any time during the first month of hostilities. But gradually, troops from the North arrived and rescued the seat of government from danger. In Baltimore, sentiment was strongly for secession. The government of Maryland was on the point of leading the state in the wake of her erring sisters. The passage through Baltimore of the 1st Northern Regiment occasioned a serious riot, and the regiments that followed had to be transported by way of Annapolis until Baltimore was occupied by a sufficient force to control its unruly population. All these events, and many other minor circumstances, were mere incidents to the opening of hostilities and need but a casual reference. They scarcely belong to the military history of the war. The new belligerents proposed to make their primary line of defense along the Ohio River and the northern boundary of Maryland. A glance at the map shows how large is the territory so covered as compared with the loyal states, and quells our wonder at the opinion which foreigners at first held as to the probable issue of our struggle, although the census of 1860 shows nearly 2/3 of the population to be in the North. But the conditions under which the Southern people lived were doubtless such as to enable it to organize an efficient army with more celerity. And this fact was overestimated abroad, while the knowledge of where resided the sinews of war was naturally more limited than at present. For be it remembered that 35 years ago, we occupied no more important place in the eyes of even intelligent Europeans than do at present the South American states in ours. There lurked no doubt in the minds of the Southern leaders that Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri would join the Confederacy, while Virginia was considered one body indivisible, but they were destined to early disappointment, as surely as to eventual miscarriage of the bitterest kind. In the seething of political uncertainties, Kentucky was saved to the Union. Even the western half of Virginia followed her watercourses and affiliated with Ohio, rather than with her slave-holding twin, while the troubles in Baltimore culminated in the half-willing redemption of Maryland. The Potomac thus became a northern barrier instead of a southern base. The Confederates were driven to substitute for it the Rappahannock in Virginia, while west of the Alleghanies, as the Ohio River remained in our control, they were forced to adopt an irregular line across the state of Kentucky on which to make their first defense. This line was, however, weak, because it is tapped by the Mississippi, the Cumberland, and the Tennessee rivers, and these became at once available to our armies as lines of operation and supply. And the early control by us of both banks of the Ohio River, together with the rescue of Missouri from secession government by Blair and Gallant Lyon, enabled us to keep the war off loyal territory. Chapter 3. The First Clash of Arms. Hostilities were initiated in the East by General B. McClellan's campaign in West Virginia. It was essential to preserve intact the newborn state from the aggression of her ancient partner, and to organize her forces. A movement culminating in a small success at Philippi gave a happy inspiration to our arms, and did something to save the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad to the Federals. To recover possession of, or interrupt this great highway, of imperative necessity to us, was the cause of constant southern raids thereafter. Following upon Philippi, early in the summer, McClellan, with Rosecrans as his second, won an easy triumph over Garnett and Pegram at the Battle of Rich Mountain, and definitely rescued West Virginia from the control of Confederate troops. This first success, though obtained by simple means, was lauded as a great strategic feat. It gave both McClellan and Rosecrans a reputation which did them eventual injustice, inasmuch as it thrust them into prominent positions, which no officer in the country was equal to without the experience of many months and frequent failures. The nation was utterly uneducated in war. General Winfield Scott, our commander-in-chief, whose native ability was unquestioned, had outlived his powers. Few of our officers had commanded even a regiment. Our only recent training had been in the Mexican War, a distinctly fine campaign, but of limited scope. The work now to be done required armies such as none, since Napoleon had seen under his control. Unlucky they who were early placed in high command. The conditions of failure were strong in both themselves and the people for whom they fought. Inspired by McClellan's success, General Patterson, appointed to command Pennsylvania forces, projected a plan for recapturing Harper's Ferry, now held by General Jos. E. Johnston. This proved easy of accomplishment, for Johnston evacuated the place as untenable, destroyed the works, and retired upon Winchester. Not far away, Patterson, after sundry countermarchings, sat down before his opponent, under explicit instructions from General Scott to bring him to battle, or, in any event, to stand athwart his path, and prevent his reinforcing the main body of the enemy in the movement now being projected towards Centerville. Encouraged by certain logistic successes at Annapolis and Baltimore, General Butler, who had been transferred to Fortress Monroe, managed to make his first military fiasco at Big Bethel. This affair, which was an attempt to break up a Confederate camp at that place, amounted to no more than to display incompetency in conception and conduct. But it greatly elated the South, as did also Schenck's quasi-picnic reconnaissance on railroad cars to Vienna, Weibranla, about the same time, in which he was preceded by neither vanguard nor flankers, and was surprised and routed by a party of the enemy, who concealed themselves in the woods for the purpose. Chapter 4. Bull Run. It was between the rival capitals that public opinion first worried our army into serious operations. The forces in the field at this time had grown to unusual proportions. On the Union side, close upon 200,000 men bore arms. On the Confederate, all but 100,000. The Union fleet consisted of 69 vessels, carrying 1,346 guns. There lay along the Potomac a full 100,000 men. But the eager champions of either belligerent were yet far from being soldiers. McDowell, who commanded the army in the field in front of Washington, though he had little confidence in the discipline of his troops, was constrained into action by pressure from the War Department and the President, who in their turn responded only to the clamor of the impatient North. He accordingly set a column of about 30,000 men in motion against the Confederate General Beauregard, who withdrew behind Bull Run with a somewhat inferior force. Each was determined to measure swords with his ancient comrade. When the armies have been brought into tactical contact, each commander plans a maneuver by which to turn the other's left. The Federals are earlier in the execution of theirs, crossing Bull Run above the Stone Bridge, and come very near to crushing the Confederate left, which has been depleted by Beauregard in order to strengthen his right. For with the latter wing, he proposes to cross the stream at Blackburn's Ford and Union Mills, and to fall upon McDowell's left, at Centerville. A small force of the enemy has gallantly held the Manassas Plateau against our advance, but only with grievous loss. It is here that Thomas J. Jackson well earns the sobriquet of Stonewall by his solid defense. Victory seems to declare for McDowell. It is almost within his grasp. The Southern outlook is desperate, but Beauregard recalls his scattered forces from the right. The plateau is secured. The conflict is again renewed and with vigor. The raw troops on both sides have fought with a gallantry premonitory of bloodier contests. Officers have fallen in great numbers. Both contestants have been quickly exhausted. And on either side there is wanting but a trifling cause to incline towards victory or defeat. But Patterson's senility works our ruin. In lieu of barring Johnston's passage, his one obvious duty, he has left an open road for this wily soldier to escape him in the valley and to march to the assistance of Beauregard. Johnston, with a portion of his troops, is already present. The rest are coming up by the railroad. It is 2:30 p.m. The dust of an approaching column is seen on the horizon. Is it Patterson, or is it Kirby Smith, with the balance of the Army of the Shenandoah? Beauregard prepares for retreat, for he fears it is the Federal column. But the stars and bars are finally descried. The Confederate hour of triumph has come. The arrival on the field of this last detachment throws 8,000 fresh troops upon the Union flank and rear, and turns the tide. The laurels which McDowell should have added to his always solid reputation are lost in a confused retreat. And this, before the vicinity of Washington is reached, becomes utter rout. The enemy is, however, in a similar strait, and no idea of pursuit is entertained. The losses, 2,700 on ours and nearly as much on the enemy's side, show that the field has been neither won nor lost without stubborn contest. Patterson, after this disgraceful lapse, retires to Harper's Ferry, where he is superseded by Banks. After Bull Run, McClellan, fresh from his so quickly won laurels in West Virginia, was placed in supreme command and sat down to the giant's task of making a mob an army. The South, lulled into the exultant belief that this one victory would suffice to close the war, really suffered worse than the consequences of a defeat in allowing self-applause to take the place of a vigorous course of discipline. Bull Run worked benefit to the Union in as great measure as it damaged the Confederate cause. The minds of all in the northern states were cemented by this disaster into the one purpose of crushing out the heresy of secession. Chapter 5. The Mighty West Moves. The operations in Missouri command but a passing notice, as all trans-Mississippi maneuvers bore small relation to the general strategy of the more important fields. Yet, as the possession of any part of that state by the enemy would have made the opening of the Mississippi River a much more onerous task for us. The work of rescuing its entire territory from Confederate control deserves its due credit among the efforts of the war. General Lyon had assumed control of affairs in Missouri and had dispersed the forces of seceding Governor Jackson at Boonville, while Sigel, an ancient German officer, had been very active in raising a small force of volunteers in the lower counties and had crossed swords with the enemy at Carthage. But, meeting with a reverse, he was fain to retire to Springfield under the aegis of his chief. The effect of these and other lesser operations had narrowed the control of the Confederates to the southwest corner of the state, whither Lyon had pushed his little army. It was not long, however, before Lyon, unsupported by his superior, Fremont, found that the advance of the Confederates Price and McCulloch upon his position at Springfield with a large force was seriously compromising his safety. To rescue himself, he boldly assailed the enemy at Wilson's Creek. Sigel was sent by a circuit to fall upon the enemy's rear, but his men, largely 3 months volunteers, whose time was nearly up, fought half-heartedly, and his own lack of conduct resulted in defeat. Lyon was outnumbered 2-1. The battle fought here was one of the most stubborn minor contests of the war. The Federals lost the field, and gallant Lyon his life, while heading a charge to retrieve the disasters of the day. The little army was barely rescued from destruction by a summary retreat, happily without pursuit, to Springfield under command of Major Sturgis. Out of 6,000 men, our casualties were 1,200. The enemy lost a less number out of 12,000. The Southerners have named this victory Oak Hills. The Confederates were soon able to score an additional triumph in Missouri by the capture of Lexington. of which place Colonel Mulligan was in command. Price advanced from Wilson's Creek. With some 3,000 men, Mulligan bravely held the town against Price with 20,000 until his water supply was cut off, when he surrendered what remained of his force. The enemy had thus recovered for a time a substantial part of the state. After many delays, Fremont finally took the field with 40,000 men and advanced to Springfield, the Confederates having already retired. He seems to have expected to fight a battle here, though the enemy was actually some 60 miles away. But on the eve of this hypothetical combat, he was superseded by Hunter and retired to St. Louis. Fremont undoubtedly possessed ability and had in former days exhibited brilliant qualities in irregular warfare, but his conduct in the Civil War lacked every element of usefulness. Meanwhile, in July, General Pope took command in northern Missouri, which, by a few vigorous blows with sword and pen, he cleared from open and secret rebels. He later rescued the region between the Osage and the Missouri rivers from Confederate control. He was building for himself the reputation which soon placed him in command beyond his powers. All these stirring events in Missouri evinced the greatest activity, but their only effect on the general struggle lay in the moral weight the possession of this state gave to our arms. In the shifting of commanders, so constant in the first years of the war, General Halleck early became chief player on the chessboard west of the Appalachians, while his subordinates accomplished in great part the results attributed to his strategic ability. Halleck was a most scholarly soldier. In the cabinet none was more astute, but his action was slow. In the field he personally brought to pass nothing. Subsequently, as commander-in-chief at Washington, his peculiar methods more than once induced disaster. General Sherman had succeeded Anderson in Kentucky. General Grant began to display his activity and enabled the troops under his orders to learn something of warfare in an expedition against Belmont. With a force of 3,000 men, he moved from Cairo against the Confederate camp at that place, and, though obliged after a day's skirmishing to retire with a loss of 500 men, he nevertheless broke up the insurgent stronghold. The Confederates may lay such claim to victory as the possession of the field of battle always gives. No permanent gain was accomplished by Grant, and he was forced to retire to Cairo. Chapter 6. The First Confederate Line Broken. At the beginning of the new year, the Union armies were 576,000 strong, backed by a fleet of 212 vessels. McClellan lay quiet upon the Potomac all winter, drilling, organizing, disciplining the Army of the Potomac. In his front was Joe Johnston, with a much smaller force, pushing forward with equal energy the schooling of his soldiers. The Western generals were more active. Albert Sidney Johnston, perhaps the most promising Southern officer, was in command in the West, with headquarters at Bowling Green. Buell lay in Johnston's front, having superseded Sherman, whose crazy suggestion that 250,000 men would be required for operations on the Western field had lost him the confidence of his superiors. There was abundant method in his madness, as time all too fully showed. In eastern Kentucky, the Confederate Humphrey Marshall had been creating more or less political trouble, and General Garfield was sent against him with some 2,000 men. Marshall somewhat outnumbered Garfield, but in a vigorous January campaign, culminating at Prestonburg, Garfield quite dispersed his forces and drove him into the mountains. About the same time, Zollicoffer, who had held the extreme right of the Confederate line in advance of Cumberland Gap, had retired from his post and joined Crittenden near Mill Springs in central Kentucky, and to General George H. Thomas was committed the duty of disposing of them. With a somewhat superior force, Thomas moved upon the enemy, and in a sharp engagement at Logan's Crossroads, utterly broke up their army. Zollicoffer was killed. This first of our substantial Western victories, called Fishing Creek by the enemy, was a great encouragement to our arms. Our loss was 250. To the enemy's 500, Crittenden withdrew his troops across the Cumberland, abandoning his artillery and trains. Eastern Kentucky was thus freed from the Confederates. Halleck's first task as commander of the Western armies was to penetrate the Confederate line of defense. This could be done by breaking its center or by turning one of its flanks. The former appeared most feasible to Grant and Commodore Foote, who commanded the naval forces. Under instructions from Halleck, 7 of the gunboat flotilla, with Grant's 17,000 men in reserve, moved up the Tennessee River to attack Fort Henry and assay the value of gunboats in amphibious warfare. Grant landed below the fort, and Foote then opened fire upon it. Tillman, in command, foreseeing its capture, was shrewd enough to send off the bulk of his force to Fort Donelson. He himself made a mock defense with a handful of men. Surrendering the fort after the garrison was well on its way. The effect of this first demonstration was at once felt throughout the entire Confederate line. The opening of the Tennessee River enabled us to operate directly in rear of Johnston's left wing. It flanked Columbus. It alarmed Polk and Pillow. It rendered the navigation of the Tennessee practicable as far as the North Alabama line. Grant promptly followed up the advantage by a march of 12 miles across the country to Fort Donelson. Situated upon the Cumberland River and occupied by nearly 20,000 men under Floyd, Pillow, and Buckner. Grant had some 27,000 men, and Foote's gunboats supported the movement by water. The fortifications were strong, but the garrison was not entirely harmonious. The landward attack was begun at once, and after 2 days of continuous fighting, a brilliant assault was made upon the Confederate right by Smith's division, which gave us an advantage on that wing. But on the next day, Buckner broke through our right and seemed to have opened a way of retreat for the garrison. The issue was still uncertain. In fact, the tide of battle seemed against us. But on the 16th of February, the Confederate leaders held a council of war. There were 3 of them: Floyd, late Secretary of War under Buchanan; Pillow, a Mexican War veteran; and Buckner, a capable and honorable soldier. It was decided to surrender the fort, but Floyd and Pillow, with a lively distrust of federal prisons, escaped down the river. Buckner remained behind to conduct the capitulation. This he did in correspondence with Grant, which has become historical. Buckner requested an armistice to agree upon terms. Grant replied, "The United States will accept no terms but unconditional and immediate surrender. I propose to move immediately upon your works." Buckner had no choice. The surrender included 14,000 men. This was the first substantial gain for the North in the shape of prisoners. It also gave us 65 cannon and 17,000 stands of arms. It broke the Confederate line of defense. It raised the spirits of the North. It sent a thrill of despair through the South. The only escape from the magnitude of this disaster was found in the assertion that the victors had sacrificed 5,000 men to gain the result, but our loss did not exceed 2,500. This brilliant campaign gave Grant and Foote high honors, and the sobriquet of unconditional surrender. Grant has clung to the hero of Donelson throughout all his varied fortunes. Nashville, in rear of Donelson and on the Cumberland River, was no longer tenable by the Confederates. The capital of Tennessee and vast stores of war material fell into our hands. Nashville was not evacuated without a struggle between the state authorities and the Southern troops. The legislature advocated unconditional submission to the United States. The arrival of Johnston's army alone restored a measure of order. He took what stores could be carried and left the city to its fate. Johnston's position was now compromised. He had relied on the rivers and on Fort Donelson as a defense to his rear. His center was broken. Columbus, held by Polk with strong fortifications and a considerable army, was flanked and abandoned by its garrison. The whole western strategy of the South was thrown into disorder. Island No. 10 was fortified to cover the retreat from Columbus and to arrest the passage of our fleet down the river. It was naturally strong, being located in a bend in the river where a succession of spurs of land jutted into the stream. The channel had that sinuous form which naval tacticians so dread. as it exposes vessels at every turn to an enfilading fire. The island was protected by numerous batteries, both on the island and on the main shore. To invest it, General Pope, with 20,000 men, was sent to New Madrid, below the bend, on the Missouri shore. This town was strongly fortified and garrisoned by 5,000 men under McCown and Stuart. A brisk cannonade followed Pope's investment. Heavy siege guns were brought up and planted. The Confederates finally evacuated the town and fled to the island. Pope now desired to cross over and cooperate with the fleet, but the latter could not pass the island guns. By a bold device, Captain Walke, with the gunboat Carondelet, ran the batteries at night amid a tempest of shot and shell and joined Pope. The land forces then crossed the river, surrounded the Confederate batteries, and captured the entire garrison. 7,000 men, 123 cannon, and a vast quantity of ammunition and small arms were the trophies of our arms. The Mississippi River was now opened as far as Fort Pillow, above Memphis. This line of river operations had led to the occupation of Pittsburgh Landing on the Tennessee River. The movement had become part of the strategic campaign against the Southern center. Grant had moved up the river to this point, had landed his troops, and was awaiting reinforcements from Buell. Johnston saw his opportunity. He had massed his army at Corinth, Mississippi. He resolved to crush Grant before the junction with Buell could be made. On Sunday morning, April the 6th, he assailed our position with fierce impetuosity. The Union troops were taken by surprise. The enemy drove us from point to point. Our camps were captured. Our lines were broken. We were pressed back upon the river. Nelson's division of Buell's army had already arrived at Savannah, a few miles below Pittsburgh Landing, but it was not yet on the field. Grant had no alternative but to stand his ground and await reinforcements. The night was spent in making hasty dispositions to retrieve the lost day. Monday morning came. The remnant of Grant's army was in line. It had been reinforced during the night. Nelson's division reached the field. Buell was present in person. The line was reformed. The enemy was attacked in turn. The fortunes of the day were reversed. Step by step, the assailants were beaten back. The field was regained. And before nightfall, Johnston's army was in full retreat to Corinth. The Union loss was 13,000 men. The Confederate loss was 10,000. Among the latter was General Albert Sidney Johnston, killed in the thick of battle. He had displayed high military talents. He had shown skill in the concentration of his troops. His death was a fatal blow to the Southern cause. This great battle has been called by the name of Shiloh, from a log meeting house near the center of the line. Chapter 7. Oaragus and the Mississippi. While Halleck, now in supreme command in the West, was slowly reorganizing the shattered Union army at Shiloh and pushing it forward in a cautious advance upon Corinth, an event of more importance than any single land operation occurred in the capture of New Orleans. This city was not only the largest commercial metropolis of the South, but was also of great strategical value. It controlled the outlet of the Mississippi. It was the entrepot of supplies. Its capture would be a fatal blow to the Southern Confederacy. New Orleans was protected by Forts Jackson and St. Philip, situated on either bank of the Mississippi, 75 miles below the city. These works mounted 115 guns and were garrisoned by over 1,000 men. Above the forts and near the city was stationed a Confederate fleet. The river had been obstructed by chains and hulks. Farragut was sent with a powerful fleet to reduce the forts and force a passage to New Orleans. Captain Porter accompanied him with a mortar flotilla. General Butler had a land force of 15,000 men to cooperate with the Navy. The mortar flotilla was first brought into play. A continuous bombardment of 6 days had little effect. The forts, though somewhat injured, were still formidable. It was then decided to attempt the passage of the forts by the fleet. The work of breaching the obstruction was successfully accomplished by the gunboats. Before dawn on the morning of April 24th, the fleet weighed anchor. The flagship Hartford led the way. She was followed by the Richmond, Brooklyn, and other vessels of war. As they advanced, the forts opened a terrific fire. The Confederate fleet came down to engage them. A desperate naval combat ensued. The Hartford ran aground, but soon floated again, though her rigging was on fire. The Brooklyn and Richmond suffered severely, but, one by one, the Union ships passed the forts and engaged the enemy's fleet. 13 Confederate vessels, including the ram Manassas and the ironclad Louisiana, were destroyed or dispersed. The passage of the forts was complete. The fleet then moved up the river and appeared before the city. There was no further resistance. The troops had been withdrawn. The city was at the mercy of the fleet. On April 28th, the forts, after Porter had resumed the bombardment, surrendered. On May 1st, General Butler took formal possession of New Orleans. This brilliant exploit electrified the North. It gave us the Mississippi from its mouth to Vicksburg. It divided the Confederacy. It paralyzed the Southern commerce. It was the most stunning blow yet given to the rebellion. Farragut and Porter were the heroes of the day. The Navy had won the greatest triumph of the war. Butler assumed military control of New Orleans. He ruled with a high hand. He repressed treason, but aroused much ill feeling by his arbitrary measures. Some of his acts were harsh, others were unnecessary. But his rule was effective. He saved the city from anarchy. He impressed the enemy with the power of the United States. His administration was condemned by the South, but it preserved the fruits of our naval victory. Porter and Farragut, after resting their fleets, proceeded up the Mississippi. They passed Baton Rouge, Natchez, and Grand Gulf. They reached Vicksburg. This city stood upon high bluffs commanding the river. It had been strongly fortified. The fleet opened fire upon the batteries. Porter attempted to run the blockade with his mortar boats. But the city was not to be reduced by water alone. Vicksburg remained in the hands of the enemy. The gunboats returned to New Orleans. A new campaign was required for the reduction of this stronghold. The capture of New Orleans had not been anticipated by the Confederate leaders. It disconcerted their plans. It compelled them to concentrate for its recovery. It alarmed their friends abroad. It strengthened the hands of the Union government. It offset the disasters in the East. It was, in short, the turning point of the war. Chapter 8. The Peninsular Campaign. In the East, during the winter of 1861-62, the Army of the Potomac under McClellan had grown into a vast and well-disciplined force. The general had organized his troops with great care. He had drilled them incessantly. He had inspired them with confidence in himself, but he had not advanced. The country grew impatient. Congress demanded action. The president urged a forward movement. McClellan protested that the army was not ready. At last, in March 1862, he yielded to pressure. The plan he had long meditated was adopted. It was to transfer the army by water to the peninsula and advance upon Richmond from the southeast. The movement began with secrecy and celerity. Fort Monroe was made the base of operations. By April, 100,000 men were assembled near Yorktown, but the Confederate General Magruder, with 11,000 troops, had fortified a line across the peninsula. McClellan halted. He began a regular siege of Yorktown. This delay of a month gave the enemy time to reinforce. Johnston took command and gradually withdrew toward Richmond. McClellan pushed after him, and at Williamsburg the retreating foe made a stand. A sharp battle followed. The Union loss was 2,000 men. The enemy's loss was about the same. Johnston continued his retreat. The Union army followed slowly up the Chickahominy. The country was swampy. The roads were wretched. The bridges were destroyed. The weather was rainy. The movement was difficult. Still the army advanced, and by the end of May was within 10 miles of Richmond. The Chickahominy River separated the two wings of McClellan's army. This was his weakest moment. Johnston seized the opportunity. On May 31st, he attacked the Union left at Fair Oaks and Seven Pines. A bloody engagement ensued. General Sumner crossed the river and reinforced the imperiled troops. The enemy was repulsed. The Union loss was 5,000 men. The Confederate loss was 6,000. General Johnston was seriously wounded. He was succeeded by General R.E. Lee. Lee at once began to concentrate the Confederate forces. He fortified Richmond. He summoned Jackson from the valley. He prepared to assume the offensive. McClellan still lingered on the Chickahominy. He demanded reinforcements. He exaggerated the enemy's numbers. He feared for the safety of Washington. He was deceived by Stuart's cavalry raid around his army. He delayed action. On June 25th, he moved forward a portion of his force. The Battle of Oak Grove resulted. It was indecisive. Then Lee struck a sudden blow. On June 26th, he attacked the Union right at Mechanicsville. He was repulsed, but Jackson had now arrived. The next day, Lee renewed the attack at Gaines's Mill. After a desperate fight, the Union forces were driven back across the Chickahominy. McClellan now resolved to change his base to the James River. He began a retreat, masterly in its execution. It was a series of battles. June 29th, the enemy attacked at Savage's Station. The Federals repelled the assault. June 30th, another engagement occurred at Glendale or White Oak Swamp. Again, the Union troops held their ground. July 1st, the final conflict took place at Malvern Hill. There, the Union artillery swept the field with deadly effect. Lee's army was repulsed with great slaughter. McClellan reached Harrison's Landing. His retreat had been skillful. His army was safe, but he had failed to take Richmond. The Peninsular Campaign was over. It had cost the Union Army over 15,000 men. The enemy had lost more, but Richmond remained in Confederate hands. Public confidence in McClellan was shaken. He had organized the army well. He had fought bravely, but he lacked decision. He hesitated when he should have advanced. He magnified difficulties. He underestimated his own strength. He overestimated that of the enemy. His campaign had been gallant, but fruitless. He was now superseded. General Pope was placed in command of the Army of Virginia. He was expected to retrieve the eastern disasters. McClellan was ordered to withdraw from the peninsula. The Army of the Potomac slowly returned to Washington. Lee had now the advantage. The Federal forces were divided. McClellan was on the James, Pope was in northern Virginia. Lee resolved to crush Pope before McClellan could arrive. Jackson was sent forward by rapid marches. He seized Pope's supplies at Manassas. He prepared to strike the Union rear. Pope turned to meet him. The two armies confronted each other near the old Bull Run battlefield. On August 29th and 30th, the Second Battle of Manassas was fought. Pope's army was defeated. He fell back toward Washington. Lee had won another victory. Chapter 9. Antietam and Emancipation. Flushed with victory, Lee determined to invade the North. He crossed the Potomac into Maryland. He hoped to arouse the Southern sentiment in that state. He hoped to threaten Baltimore and Washington. He hoped to draw McClellan away from Richmond. The Confederacy aimed to carry the war into the enemy's country. Lee issued a proclamation. He called upon Maryland to join the South. But the people did not respond. Maryland remained loyal. McClellan was now reinstated in command. He moved with vigor. He advanced rapidly. He overtook the Confederate rear at South Mountain. A sharp engagement followed. The enemy was repulsed. Lee fell back to Antietam Creek near Sharpsburg. Here he took a strong position. McClellan came up with the Union Army. On September 17th, the great battle was fought. It was the bloodiest day of the war. At dawn, Hooker assailed the Confederate left. The fighting was terrible. Corps after corps was hurled into the contest. The Union right advanced. The Union center pressed forward. The left engaged the enemy with fury. Burnside crossed the bridge and attacked the Southern right. Every part of the field was hotly contested. Charge met charge. The ground was strewn with dead. The sun went down on an undecided field. Each army held its ground. The next day, both waited. Lee remained in position. McClellan delayed action. On the 19th, the enemy retired. The Union Army claimed the victory, but the fruits of triumph were not gathered. Lee escaped across the Potomac. He was not pursued. McClellan again delayed. The president was disappointed. He had hoped for decisive results, but Antietam was a check to invasion. It relieved Maryland and Pennsylvania. It gave the North new courage. It ended the Southern campaign in the East for the year. It was the first considerable success of the Union Army in Virginia, and it gave Lincoln the opportunity he desired. The president had resolved to free the slaves. He had waited for a victory. He had warned the South. Now he acted. On September 22nd, he issued the preliminary proclamation. It declared that on the 1st of January, 1863, all slaves in states or parts of states in rebellion should be forever free. The act was based on military necessity. It was a war measure. It was intended to weaken the South. It was intended to strengthen the Union cause. It changed the character of the contest. It made the war a struggle for human liberty. It gave the North a moral advantage. It rallied foreign sympathy. It discouraged European intervention. It thrilled the hearts of Union soldiers. It gave new hope to the colored race. It will forever be remembered. And on January 1st, 1863, the final proclamation was issued. Freedom was proclaimed. The slaves were declared free. The act was momentous. It marked an epoch. It was hailed with joy. It was opposed by many. It was denounced as revolutionary. But it stood. It was enforced by the army. It became the law of the land. It was the beginning of the end of slavery in America. Chapter 10. The War on the Sea. The Navy played a brilliant part in the Civil War. Its work was not so spectacular as that of the armies, but it was vital. It blockaded the southern ports. It captured strategic positions. It assisted land operations. It suppressed privateering. It fought great battles. It made the Mississippi a Union river. At the outset, the Navy was small. It had but 90 vessels. Only 40 were fit for service. But the government acted with energy. New ships were built. Old ones were repaired. Merchantmen were purchased. Ironclads were constructed. By the end of the war, the Navy had 600 vessels. It controlled the sea. It guarded the coasts. It cruised on every ocean. The blockade was a colossal task. The southern coast stretched 3,000 miles. It had many harbors and inlets. The Confederates ran the blockade with swift steamers. They brought in arms and supplies. They carried out cotton. But the blockade grew tighter. Port after port was closed. Trade was crippled. Supplies failed. The South suffered sorely. The blockade was effective. It was recognized by foreign nations. It helped to wear out the rebellion. Privateering was early attempted by the South, but it failed. Foreign countries would not permit the sale of prizes. Our cruisers scoured the seas. Blockade runners were hunted down. The Confederate commerce destroyers did much damage. The Sumter in Alabama were most famous. The Sumter was the first. She captured many vessels. She was finally blockaded and sold. Her career was short. The Alabama was built in England. She was launched at Liverpool. She escaped to the Azores. There she was, armed and manned. She cruised the seas. She destroyed merchantmen. She spread alarm. She avoided the Navy. She was a terror to our commerce. At last, she was overtaken. Captain Semmes commanded her. He was brave and skillful. But Captain Winslow of the Kearsarge sought her. He found her at Cherbourg, France. On June 19, 1864, the two ships fought. The Alabama was sunk. The Kearsarge won the day. It was a dramatic battle. It thrilled the world. It ended the Alabama's career. England was blamed for her acts. The United States demanded redress. The Alabama claims became historic. They were settled by arbitration. England paid $15 million. It was a triumph of diplomacy. The greatest naval battle of the war occurred in Hampton Roads. It was the duel of the Monitor, and the Merrimac. The Merrimac was a captured Union ship. The Confederates plated her with iron. They gave her a powerful ram. They called her the Virginia. She was a floating battery. On March 8, 1862, she steamed out. She attacked the Union fleet. She destroyed the Cumberland. She burned the Congress. She defied all attack. She retired unharmed. Terror reigned. But that night the Monitor arrived. She was a new craft. She was built by Erickson. She was flat, low, ironclad, with a revolving turret. She was a sea curiosity. On March 9th, she met the Merrimac. The battle lasted for hours. The guns thundered. The iron rang. The vessels rammed. They fought at close quarters. Neither could destroy the other. But the Merrimac withdrew. She had failed to break the blockade. She had met her match. The Monitor had saved the fleet. The result was a naval revolution. Wooden ships were doomed. Ironclads were supreme. The navies of the world were changed. The United States led the way. The Monitor gave her name to a new type. She was followed by many others. Porter's mortar fleet aided Farragut. The gunboats fought at Donelson and Shiloh. The Navy kept pace with the Army. On the coasts, naval victories multiplied. Port Royal was captured. Hilton Head became a base. Roanoke Island was taken. New Bern fell. Fort Macon surrendered. These successes gave footholds on the Atlantic shore. They helped the final triumph. The Navy did its work. It upheld the Union. It added luster to the flag. Chapter 11. Chancellorsville and Gettysburg. The year 1863 opened with great hopes. The Emancipation Proclamation had thrilled the North. The South was resolute. The war was at white heat. In the West, victories had been won. In the East, defeat had been frequent. The Army of the Potomac had suffered in morale. After Antietam, McClellan delayed. He failed to pursue Lee. The president removed him. General Burnside succeeded. He marched against Fredericksburg. Lee confronted him behind strong works. On December 13, 1862, Burnside assaulted. The result was disastrous. The Union Army was repulsed. 13,000 men fell. The enemy lost 5,000. Burnside withdrew. He attempted another movement. It failed in the mud. He resigned the command. General Hooker took his place. He reorganized the army. He raised its spirits. He prepared to move. In May 1863, he crossed the Rappahannock. He marched to Chancellorsville. Lee moved to meet him. The Union Army was strong. Lee was bold. He divided his forces. He sent Jackson to strike Hooker's flank. On May the 2nd, Jackson fell upon the 11th Corps. It broke and fled. The line was endangered, but Jackson was mortally wounded. Lee pressed on. On May 3rd and 4th, fierce battles raged. Hooker lost heart. He fell back. He recrossed the river. The campaign had failed. The Union loss was 17,000. The Confederates lost 13,000. The death of Jackson was a blow to the South. He had been Lee's right arm. His genius had saved the day. His fall saddened the South. It rejoiced the North. Lee now resolved to invade the North again. He hoped to draw the war from Virginia. He hoped to threaten Washington and Baltimore. He hoped to influence foreign powers. He marched down the Shenandoah Valley. He crossed the Potomac. He moved into Pennsylvania. The North was alarmed. Philadelphia was endangered. New York was aroused. The president acted. General Meade was placed in command. He moved rapidly. He followed Lee. He came upon the enemy at Gettysburg. The little town became historic. On July 1st, 1863, the advance forces met. The Union cavalry delayed the enemy. Reynolds fell. The troops fell back. That night, both armies gathered. Lee was on Seminary Ridge. Meade occupied Cemetery Hill. On July the 2nd, the battle opened. Longstreet attacked the Union left. Fierce fighting raged at the Peach Orchard, Wheat Field, and Round Top. The Union lines held. On the right, Ewell assailed Culp's Hill. He was repulsed. The second day closed with Meade still firm. On July 3rd, Lee made his grand assault. It was Pickett's charge. 15,000 men swept across the plain. They struck the Union center. They pierced the line. They reached the crest. Then they were hurled back. The charge had failed. It was heroic, but vain. The field was won. Lee had lost the day. He waited 1 day longer. Then he retreated. He crossed the Potomac. Meade pursued. But Lee escaped. Gettysburg was the turning point. It was the high tide of the rebellion. It ended the Confederate invasion. It gave the Union new strength. It proved that Lee could be beaten. It heartened the North. It broke the charm of Southern invincibility. The Union loss was 23,000. The Confederate loss was over 30,000. Both armies had fought superbly, but the Union had triumphed, and on the same day, far in the west, Vicksburg fell. Chapter 12. The Fall of Vicksburg. Vicksburg was the Gibraltar of the Mississippi. It stood on high bluffs. It commanded the river. It was strongly fortified. It was bravely held. It blocked the Union fleets. It kept the river closed. It held the Confederacy together. Its capture was vital. The task fell to General Grant. He had tried many plans. He had failed at Holly Springs. He had marched into the swamps. He had tried to dig canals. He had labored long. He had persevered. At last, he resolved to move below the city. He marched down the western bank. Porter ran the batteries. The army crossed the river. It landed at Bruinsburg. Grant was now in the rear of Vicksburg. He cut loose from his base. He advanced boldly. He fought at Port Gibson. He won the field. He turned upon Jackson. He struck the enemy there. He destroyed their stores. He marched swiftly back. He attacked the Vicksburg garrison. He fought at Champion Hills. He gained a great victory. He drove the enemy into Vicksburg. He assaulted the works. He was repulsed. Then he began the siege. He dug parallels. He planted batteries. He pressed the lines. He cut off supplies. He bombarded day and night. The enemy suffered. The citizens fled to caves. Food grew scarce. Horses were eaten. Mules were boiled for soup. Men grew gaunt. The end was near. On July 4th, 1863, Vicksburg surrendered. 30,000 men laid down arms. 172 cannon were captured. The Union flag floated on the bluffs. The river was open. The Confederacy was cut in twain. The West was saved. It was a mighty triumph. It came with Gettysburg. It made Independence Day doubly glorious. Grant was the hero. His campaign had been daring. It had been brilliant. It had been successful. He had marched, fought, and conquered. He had proved his genius. The president thanked him. Congress voted him praise. The people honored him. The fall of Vicksburg broke the Southern line. Port Hudson surrendered. The Mississippi flowed unvexed. The Union had triumphed. It was a death blow to the rebellion. The West was secure. The East took courage. The end seemed nearer. Chapter 13, Chickamauga and Chattanooga. After the fall of Vicksburg, attention turned to Tennessee. The Union forces had captured Nashville. They had advanced to Chattanooga. This city was a key point. It commanded railways. It opened the gateway to Georgia. It was needed for future campaigns. General Rosecrans held command. He faced General Bragg. Bragg fell back. He abandoned Chattanooga. Rosecrans pursued. He followed boldly. He advanced into Georgia. He crossed the mountains. He pushed his columns far apart. Bragg turned to strike. He concentrated swiftly. He attacked at Chickamauga. It was September 19th, 1863. The battle was fierce. The field was wooded. The lines were confused. The fight was stubborn. Each side held its ground. That night, reinforcements came. Longstreet arrived for the South. The 20th brought disaster. The Union right was broken. Rosecrans was swept away. He fled to Chattanooga. But Thomas stood firm. He held the left. He formed a new line. He repelled attack after attack. He earned the name of the Rock of Chickamauga. Night fell, the battle ended. The Union had lost, but it was not routed. Chattanooga was saved. The army fell back. It took position in the city. Bragg followed. He occupied the heights. He besieged the town. Supplies were cut off. Men starved. Horses died. A new commander was needed. Grant was called. He was made general of the West. He went in person. He took command. He opened a new road. He brought supplies. He restored hope. He planned a blow. Hooker came from the east. Sherman marched from Memphis. Reinforcements poured in. Bragg was still idle. He had weakened his army. He had sent Longstreet away. Grant struck. November 23rd, Orchard Knob was taken. It was a sharp fight. It opened the field. Next day, Hooker stormed Lookout Mountain. It was a sublime scene. Clouds wrapped the peak. Men fought and missed. It was called the Battle Above the Clouds. The Union won. On the 25th, the grand assault was made. Missionary Ridge rose before them. It was steep and strong. The enemy held the crest. Grant gave the word. Sherman moved on the left. Hooker pressed the right. Thomas stood in the center. The order came. The men advanced. They carried the rifle pits. Then, without command, they charged the heights. They climbed the slope. They broke the lines. They swept the ridge. They won a splendid victory. Bragg fled. His army was broken. Chattanooga was free. East Tennessee was saved. The way was open to Atlanta. The Union had won again. Grant was the master. He had risen fast. He had saved the West. He was needed in the East. Chapter 14. Grant and Sherman move. Grant had risen to fame. He was trusted by the people. He was trusted by the president. He was made lieutenant general. He took command of all the armies. He went east. He made his headquarters with the Army of the Potomac. He planned a combined campaign. Sherman was to move in the West. Grant was to strike in Virginia. The two were to work together. They were to crush the rebellion. Sherman was at Chattanooga. He had a great army. He moved toward Atlanta. It was a daring march. It was through mountains. It was through hostile land. He had to feed his army. He had to guard his lines. He moved with skill. He outflanked the enemy. He pressed on. He fought at Dalton. He fought at Resaca. He fought at Dallas. He fought at Kennesaw. He crossed the Chattahoochee. He neared Atlanta. The city was defended by General Hood. He made desperate attacks. He struck the Union lines. He was repulsed. He lost heavily. On July 22nd, McPherson fell. He was a gallant leader. His death was mourned, but the army pressed on. It closed around the city. It bombarded night and day. It cut the railroads. It flanked the defenses. It drove Hood out. On September 2nd, Atlanta fell. It was a great victory. It thrilled the North. It dismayed the South. Sherman had won again. He had broken the center. He had opened the way to the sea. Meanwhile, Grant had moved. He crossed the Rapidan. He entered the wilderness. It was a dense forest. It was full of undergrowth. The armies could not deploy. They fought hand to hand. It was May 5th and 6th. The battle was terrible. The woods caught fire. The wounded were burned. Men fell by thousands. But Grant did not retreat. He moved by the left. He struck at Spotsylvania. Again the fight was bloody. Again the enemy held. Grant moved again. He tried to turn the flank. He reached the North Anna. He crossed and attacked. He failed to break the line. He moved again. He crossed the Pamunkey. He fought at Cold Harbor. It was June the 3rd. The loss was fearful. The line could not be carried. Still Grant pushed on. He crossed the James. He invested Petersburg. He settled to a siege. He meant to wear out the enemy. He stretched his lines. He extended toward the south. He threatened the railroads. He kept Lee on the defense. The Army of the Potomac was patient. It stood the strain. It fought and dug. It never gave up. It held Lee fast. It gave the final victory. The war had entered its last stage. The North had gained the West. It held the sea. It held the Mississippi. It held Atlanta. It held Petersburg. The Confederacy was crumbling, but it fought on. Chapter 15. The March to the Sea. Sherman was at Atlanta. The city was in ruins. The people had been removed. The army rested. Then came a bold plan. He would march to the sea. He would cut the Confederacy again. He would strike Savannah. He would leave his base. He would depend on the country. It was a daring move. It startled the North. It alarmed the South. But Sherman was confident. He had 60,000 men. They were veterans. They were well armed. They were full of spirit. He destroyed the railroads. He burned the stores. He cut the wires. Then he turned east. He moved in 4 columns. He swept the land. He met little resistance. He marched through Georgia. He burned bridges. He tore up tracks. He fed on the country. He was 60 miles wide. He paralyzed the South. Cities fell. Milledgeville was taken. Macon was threatened. The state was at his mercy. The people were amazed. No army opposed. Only cavalry annoyed. The march was triumphal. He reached the coast. He neared Savannah. He invested the city. He bombarded the works. On December 21st, Savannah fell. 33,000 bales of cotton were captured. The march had ended. The coast was reached. The Confederacy was broken. The North rejoiced. The South was stunned. Sherman had kept his word. He had gone to the sea. He now turned north. He would march through the Carolinas. He would join Grant. He moved in February. He crossed rivers. He marched through swamps. He burned Columbia. He reached North Carolina. He fought at Bentonville. He entered Goldsboro. He had finished the campaign. Meanwhile, Thomas had held Tennessee. Hood had attacked. He had invaded the state. He had reached Nashville, but Thomas waited. He gathered strength. Then he struck. He fought on December 15th and 16th. He routed the enemy. He drove him south. He broke the army. The West was safe. Grant pressed on. He watched Lee. He fought at Fort Stedman. He gained the South Side Railroad. He extended his lines. He weakened the enemy. Lee was hemmed in. He made a last effort. He tried to escape. He fled toward Appomattox. Grant followed. Sheridan blocked the way. Lee saw the end. On April 9th, 1865, he surrendered. The war was over. The armies rejoiced. The people gave thanks. The Union was saved. The flag was upheld. Freedom was secured. Victory had come. It had been a long war. It had been bloody. It had tried the nation. But it had made the nation. Chapter 16. Lincoln and the end of the war. The war ended. The armies rejoiced. The people gave thanks. But the nations had suffered. It had lost brave men. It had spent vast treasure. It had endured sorrow. Yet it had won honor. It had saved the Union. It had freed the slave. It had advanced liberty. It had proved its strength. It had become a nation. Lincoln had guided it. He had been patient. He had been wise. He had been firm. He had borne burdens. He had suffered abuse. He had trusted the people. He had waited for time. He had grown in power. He had grown in fame. He had become a great man. He had secured re-election. He had seen the end. He had gone to Richmond. He had walked its streets. He had spoken words of peace. He had returned in triumph. Then came the blow. He was struck down. He was assassinated. It was on April 14th, 1865. He had gone to the theater. A shot rang out. A pistol had spoken. John Wilkes Booth had fired. The president fell. The city was shocked. The country was stunned. The world was grieved. He lingered till morning. Then he died. The nation mourned. The flags were draped. The bells tolled. Men wept. Cities were hushed. The funeral train moved. It bore the body home. It passed through great towns. It was followed by millions. It reached Springfield. There he was buried. The martyr president had fallen. But he had finished his work. He had saved the nation. He had freed the race. He had risen with his task. He had died at the summit. He was mourned by all. The North loved him. The South respected him. The world honored him. The assassin fled. He was hunted. He was overtaken. He was killed. His accomplices were tried. Some were hanged. Some were imprisoned. The crime was punished, but the loss remained. The country had lost its leader. It turned to others. Andrew Johnson became president. He had been vice president. He had been a war Democrat. He had stood by the Union. He tried to carry out Lincoln's plans. He was honest. He was patriotic. But he lacked tact. He quarreled with Congress. He hindered Reconstruction. He was impeached. He was tried. He was acquitted by one vote. He finished his term. He retired. The work of peace went on. The armies were disbanded. The soldiers went home. The volunteers became citizens. The country returned to industry. The states were restored. The Union was complete. Slavery was dead. The 13th Amendment was passed. Freedom was law. The 14th gave citizenship. The 15th gave suffrage. The black man was enfranchised. The old order was gone. A new era had begun. The war had cleansed the nation. It had burned out wrong. It had sealed the Constitution. It had baptized liberty. It had made America stronger. Chapter 17. The Role of Honor. The Civil War produced great men. It developed leaders. It tested character. It proved the strength of the people. It brought heroes to the front. It made the Republic secure. The role of honor is long. It cannot be complete. Only the most famous can be named. First stands Abraham Lincoln. He was the head of the nation. He bore the burden. He guided the ship. He never wavered. He never despaired. He stood for liberty. He stood for union. He stood for law. He died for his country. He belongs to the ages. Next is Ulysses S. Grant. He was silent. He was modest. He was firm. He fought many battles. He never lost a campaign. He led the final triumph. He gave generous terms. He was made general. He was made president. He saved the Union. He won the people. Then comes William T. Sherman. He was brilliant. He was daring. He was resolute. He marched through Georgia. He conquered the Carolinas. He helped finish the war. He was loved by his soldiers. He was trusted by the people. George H. Thomas stands high. He was faithful. He was steadfast. He was firm in the storm. He saved Chickamauga. He broke Hood at Nashville. He was the Rock of Chickamauga. He was one of the best. Philip H. Sheridan deserves praise. He was quick. He was fearless. He was magnetic. He rode to Winchester. He struck at Five Forks. He blocked Lee at Appomattox. He was young. He was brilliant. George B. McClellan had great gifts. He organized the army. He made the men ready. He failed in action, but he gave the army form. He trained it well. He was loved by the troops. He was honest and true. Henry W. Halleck was learned. He was prudent. He was cautious. He lacked vigor. He served well in council. He helped in plans. Ambrose E. Burnside was gallant. He was patriotic. He met disaster at Fredericksburg. He suffered at the crater. He bore misfortune bravely. Joseph Hooker was dashing. He was generous. He failed at Chancellorsville. He served with credit elsewhere. He did his best. George G. Meade won Gettysburg. He checked Lee. He held the line. He did not pursue, but he did his part. He was modest and brave. Winfield S. Hancock was splendid. He led the charge. He rallied the line. He stood at Gettysburg. He was called Hancock the Superb. John F. Reynolds fell early. He was skillful. He was trusted. He died at Gettysburg. He was a true soldier. John A. Logan rose from the ranks. He was brave. He was fiery. He became a leader. He helped at Vicksburg. He marched with Sherman. He served the nation long. Oliver O. Howard lost an arm. He led a corps. He founded a college. He worked for the freedmen. He was a Christian soldier. Daniel E. Sickles was wounded. He served with zeal. He helped in civil life. He stood for the Union. Benjamin F. Butler was energetic. He ruled New Orleans. He was severe. He aroused hatred, but he held the city. He was able and alert. Nathaniel P. Banks served in Louisiana. He was brave. He made mistakes. He did his duty. He held the flag high. Franz Sigel led the Germans. He was popular. He fought with courage. He was a patriot. Fitzjohn Porter was court-martialed. He was later vindicated. He had ability. He suffered much. He regained honor. David G. Farragut was great. He fought on the sea. He captured New Orleans. He won at Mobile. He cried, "Damn the torpedoes!" He was a naval hero. Andrew H. Foote commanded gunboats. He fought at Fort Donelson. He helped at Island No. 10. He was faithful and brave. Samuel F. DuPont bombarded Charleston. He served with honor. He gave his strength. He left a good name. John A. Dahlgren invented arms. He improved artillery. He led the Navy. He was skilled and true. John Erickson made the Monitor. He changed naval war. He was a genius. He helped the Union. Clara Barton nursed the wounded. She comforted the sick. She founded the Red Cross. She was the soldier's friend. Mary A. Livermore labored. She raised money. She gave time. She brought aid. She was noble. Thousands of women helped. They made garments. They sent supplies. They visited hospitals. They gave sons. They prayed for victory. The whole nation shared. The people stood firm. They paid taxes. They bought bonds. They gave all. The Republic triumphed. The honor roll is long. Every soldier is on it. Every helper is in it. The Union lives. It lives through sacrifice. It lives through devotion. It lives through loyalty. Chapter 18. Martin Van Buren. Martin Van Buren was the 8th president. He succeeded Jackson. He was a politician. He was a partisan. He was trained in public life. He was born in New York. He was of Dutch descent. He was a lawyer. He was in the legislature. He was Attorney General. He was United States Senator. He was Governor. He was Secretary of State. He was Vice President. He had risen step by step. He was courteous. He was astute. He was prudent. He was cautious. He believed in party. He believed in regularity. He managed men. He followed Jackson. He upheld his policy. He favored the spoils system. He sustained hard money. He was opposed to the bank. He inherited trouble. The Panic of 1837 came. Banks failed. Merchants broke. Men were ruined. The country suffered. The government stood firm. Van Buren did his duty. He was calm. He was honest. He recommended the independent treasury. It was opposed. It was at last passed. It kept public money separate. It ended deposits in banks. It made the treasury safe. It was good for the people. It was disliked by politicians. Van Buren tried to be just. He opposed slavery in Texas. He did not want more slave territory. He was defeated for re-election. He retired in 1841. He lived 27 years more. He traveled in Europe. He wrote a book. He watched events. He joined the Free Soil Party. He was their candidate in 1848. He opposed the extension of slavery. He stood for freedom. He lived to see the war. He lived to see the end of slavery. He died in 1862. He was a public servant. He was a party man. He was a statesman. He was the little magician. Chapter 19. William Henry Harrison. William Henry Harrison was the 9th president. He was the first Whig elected. He was born in Virginia. He was a soldier. He served in the Northwest. He fought the Indians. He led the army. He was governor of Indiana. He defeated Tecumseh. He won at Tippecanoe. He gained fame. He fought in the War of 1812. He commanded in the West. He defeated Proctor. He drove back the British. He took part in politics. He was elected to Congress. He served in the Senate. He was minister to Columbia. He was poor. He lived simply. He loved the people. He was nominated in 1840. It was a log cabin campaign. It was full of excitement. It was full of songs. It was full of processions. It stirred the masses. Tippecanoe and Tyler, too, was the cry. Hard cider was the symbol. Harrison was elected. He was hailed with joy. He came to Washington. He gave an address. It was long. The day was cold. He took a chill. He grew worse. He died in 1 month. He had served just 31 days. He was the first president to die in office. The people were shocked. They mourned sincerely. They had loved him. He was kind. He was brave. He was patriotic. He had not long to rule, but he had long served. He left a good name. He was followed by Tyler. Chapter 20. John Tyler. John Tyler was the 10th president. He succeeded Harrison. He was vice president. He was a Virginian. He was a Democrat. He had joined the Whigs. He was chosen to please the South. He became president. He disappointed the Whigs. He vetoed their bills. He opposed a new bank. He quarreled with Clay. The cabinet resigned. Only Webster remained. Tyler stood alone. He had few friends. He was firm. He had ability. He had courage. He followed his own course. He signed the Preemption Act. It gave settlers a chance. It helped the West. He signed the Tariff of 1842. It was protective. It aided industry. He favored Texas. He negotiated annexation. He sent a treaty to the Senate. It was rejected. He tried again. He gained the House. He gained the Senate. He signed the resolution. Texas was annexed. Slavery was extended. The war followed. Tyler had done it. He had pleased the South. He had angered the North. He had divided the country. He retired in 1845. He went back to Virginia. He joined the Confederacy. He was chosen to the Congress. He died before it met. He had left the Union. He had turned against his country. He had once served it well. He had been governor. He had been congressman. He had been senator. He had been vice president. He had been president. He was a statesman, but he lost the people. He went with his state. He died in 1862. Chapter 21. James K. Polk. James K. Polk was the 11th president. He was a Democrat. He followed Tyler. He was born in North Carolina. He lived in Tennessee. He was a lawyer. He was a congressman. He was Speaker of the House. He was governor of Tennessee. He was a friend of Jackson. He believed in expansion. He was nominated in 1844. He favored Texas. He favored Oregon. He was elected. He kept his promises. He annexed Texas. It caused war with Mexico. It brought new territory. He claimed Oregon. He settled with England. He got the country to the Pacific. He enlarged the nation. He stood for the people. He reformed the tariff. He restored the independent treasury. He did not seek re-election. He served 1 term. He retired in 1849. He died soon after. He had worked hard. He had served faithfully. He had extended the country. He had added millions. He had stood by his party. He had done what he promised. The Mexican War was his war. It was fought for territory. It brought great results. It trained soldiers. It opened the West. It created states. It aroused debate. It stirred slavery. It hastened the conflict. But it added greatness. Polk had his way. He was successful. He was respected. He died poor. He left a name for fidelity. Chapter 22. Zachary Taylor. Zachary Taylor was the 12th president. He was a soldier. He had fought in the War of 1812. He had served on the frontier. He had won at Palo Alto. He had won at Resaca. He had held Monterey. He had triumphed at Buena Vista. He became a hero. He was called Old Rough and Ready. He was plain. He was brave. He was honest. He was loved by the people. He was nominated in 1848. He was a Whig. He was not a politician. He had never voted. He had never held office. He was elected. He took the oath. He was president. He faced new troubles. The war had ended. The land had grown. The question of slavery arose. California asked admission. She was free. The South opposed. The North insisted. A storm was rising. Taylor stood firm. He favored the Union. He warned secessionists. He upheld the law. He was resolved. Then he was stricken. He died suddenly. It was July 9th, 1850. He had served but 16 months. He was sincere. He was patriotic. He had done his best. He left a good record. Chapter 23. Millard Fillmore. Millard Fillmore was the 13th president. He succeeded Taylor. He was born in New York. He was poor. He worked on a farm. He learned a trade. He studied law. He became a lawyer. He entered politics. He was a congressman. He was comptroller of New York. He was vice president. He became president. He was calm. He was prudent. He was moderate. He favored compromise. The country was excited. Slavery was debated. The Union was in danger. Congress acted. The Compromise of 1850 was passed. It admitted California. It organized Utah and New Mexico. It ended the slave trade in Washington. It passed the Fugitive Slave Law. It tried to quiet trouble. Fillmore approved. He enforced the law. He upheld the Union. He angered the North. He lost support. He sought nomination. He failed. He retired. He went abroad. He returned to Buffalo. He was active in local affairs. He ran again in 1856. He was a know-nothing. He was defeated. He lived quietly. He died in 1874. He was respected. He was sincere. He did his duty. Chapter 24. Franklin Pierce. Franklin Pierce was the 14th president. He was a Democrat. He was born in New Hampshire. He was well educated. He studied at Bowdoin. He was a lawyer. He entered politics. He was a congressman. He was a senator. He served in the Mexican War. He was brave. He was patriotic. He rose to be general. He was popular. He was nominated in 1852. He was unknown. He was elected. He carried all but 4 states. He took office in 1853. He appointed Jefferson Davis. He was influenced by the South. He approved the Kansas-Nebraska bill. It repealed the Missouri Compromise. It stirred the country. It divided the North. It aroused the people. It led to war. Pierce stood by it. He lost support. He tried to get Cuba. He issued the Ostend Manifesto. It failed. He sent Perry to Japan. He opened trade. He increased commerce. He enlarged the Navy. He improved the Army. He was faithful. He tried to please all. He pleased few. He sought re-election. He failed. He retired in 1857. He lived quietly. He was grieved at war. He was loyal to the Union. He died in 1869. He was amiable. He was courteous. He was unsuccessful. Chapter 25. James Buchanan. James Buchanan was the 15th president. He was a Democrat. He was born in Pennsylvania. He was well educated. He was a lawyer. He entered politics. He was a congressman. He was a senator. He was minister to Russia. He was Secretary of State. He was minister to England. He had long experience. He was nominated in 1856. He was elected. He was dignified. He was courteous. He lacked decision. He tried to conciliate. He failed. The country was excited. The Dred Scott case was decided. It upheld slavery. It denied freedom. It shocked the North. It pleased the South. Kansas was in revolt. 2 governments existed. There was civil war. Slavery was the cause. Buchanan was passive. He urged admission under the Lecompton Constitution. It was pro-slavery. It was rejected. The people ruled. Kansas was free. The North was aroused. The South was angry. The Union was shaken. Parties were divided. Lincoln was nominated. He was elected. The South seceded. States left the Union. Forts were seized. Arsenals were taken. The government did nothing. The cabinet was divided. The people were alarmed. Buchanan hesitated. He denied the right of secession. He denied the right to coerce. He waited. He delayed. He hoped for peace. It did not come. The Confederacy was formed. War was near. Buchanan retired. He gave place to Lincoln. He went to Wheatland. He wrote a book. He defended his course. He was blamed. He was not corrupt. He was patriotic. He was weak. He loved the Union. He failed to save it. He died in 1868. Chapter 26. Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was the 16th president. He was a Republican. He was born in Kentucky. He was poor. He lived in a log cabin. He worked on a farm. He split rails. He read by firelight. He taught himself. He became a lawyer. He was honest. He was able. He was elected to the legislature. He was elected to Congress. He opposed slavery. He debated with Douglas. He gained fame. He was nominated in 1860. He was elected. He took office in 1861. The South seceded. The war began. He called for troops. He raised armies. He stood for the Union. He issued the Emancipation Proclamation. He freed the slaves. He called out the people. He sustained the cause. He upheld the flag. He guided the war. He trusted Grant. He trusted Sherman. He called Stanton. He upheld the Navy. He supported Congress. He won re-election. He was generous to foes. He was kind to friends. He was full of mercy. He forgave enemies. He loved the people. He believed in right. He died in 1865. He was slain. He was mourned. He was honored. He was the nation's heart. He was the people's friend. He was the martyr of liberty. He lives in history. Chapter 27. Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson was the 17th president. He succeeded Lincoln. He was born in North Carolina. He was very poor. He was never at school. He learned a trade. He worked as a tailor. He studied at night. He married young. His wife taught him. He read books. He grew ambitious. He moved to Tennessee. He entered politics. He was in the legislature. He was in Congress. He was in the Senate. He was loyal to the Union. He stood by the flag. He was made military governor. He was elected vice president. He became president. He faced a great task. The war had ended. The states were in ruins. The South was prostrate. The Union was victorious. The question was, what next? Johnson followed Lincoln's plan. He restored the states. He pardoned leaders. He allowed governments. He tried to heal. Congress opposed. It had its own plan. It was stricter. It distrusted the South. It passed laws. Johnson vetoed them. Congress passed them again. The quarrel grew. The president lost ground. He talked unwisely. He made enemies. He opposed Congress. He removed Stanton. He violated the Tenure Act. He was impeached. He was tried by the Senate. He escaped by one vote. He served out his term. He was not nominated. He returned to Tennessee. He was elected senator. He died in 1875. He had courage. He had patriotism. He had faults. He made mistakes. He meant well. He did his best. Chapter 28. Ulysses S. Grant. Ulysses S. Grant was the 18th president. He was a soldier. He was born in Ohio. He went to West Point. He served in Mexico. He was brave. He was quiet. He resigned. He failed in business. He was poor. The war came. He offered his sword. He was made colonel. He rose fast. He won at Donelson. He won at Shiloh. He took Vicksburg. He fought at Chattanooga. He gained fame. He was made lieutenant general. He took command. He fought in Virginia. He battled in the wilderness. He fought at Spotsylvania. He attacked Cold Harbor. He besieged Petersburg. He never gave up. He wore out Lee. He captured Richmond. He ended the war. He gave generous terms. He was honored. He was loved. He was elected president. He served 2 terms. He tried to do right. He was honest. He chose poor advisors. He was criticized. He had scandals. He stood firm. He favored the Negro. He helped Reconstruction. He upheld the law. He kept the peace. He had trouble. He bore it well. He traveled abroad. He was received with honor. He was a guest of kings. He returned home. He was proposed again. He failed. He went into business. He was swindled. He lost all. He wrote a book. He was dying. He finished it. He left it to his wife. He died in 1885. He was mourned. He was buried on the Hudson. He had been victorious. He had been president. He had been poor. He had been great. Chapter 29, Rutherford B. Hayes. Rutherford B. Hayes was the 19th president. He was born in Ohio. He was well educated. He studied law. He was a lawyer. He entered politics. He served in Congress. He was governor. He was a soldier. He fought in the war. He was wounded. He was brave. He rose to general. He was nominated in 1876. The campaign was close. The vote was disputed. Both parties claimed the South. There was excitement. There was danger. A commission was formed. It counted the vote. It gave the decision. Hayes was declared elected. The people submitted. Peace was kept. Hayes took office in 1877. He was honest. He was calm. He withdrew troops from the South. He ended military rule. He tried to reconcile. He favored civil service. He stood for reform. He had opposition. He had courage. He would not serve again. He retired in 1881. He lived quietly. He favored education. He helped the freedmen. He was respected. He was sincere. He died in 1893. He left a good name. He kept the peace. He saved the country from conflict. Chapter 30, James A. Garfield. James A. Garfield was the 20th president. He was born in Ohio. He was poor. He worked on a farm. He drove canal boats. He studied at night. He earned his way. He went to school. He went to college. He became a teacher. He became a preacher. He studied law. He entered politics. He was a state senator. He joined the army. He was a general. He fought bravely. He was elected to Congress. He served 18 years. He was a leader. He was eloquent. He was wise. He was respected. He was nominated for president. He was elected. He was full of hope. He meant to reform. He meant to elevate. He meant to serve. He took office in March 1881. He appointed men. He met Congress. He had a quarrel. He took his stand. He resisted pressure. He upheld his right. Then came the blow. He was shot in July. It was a madman. It was a spoils man. It was a crime. He lingered. He suffered. He was patient. He was brave. The people prayed. The people wept. He died in September. He was mourned. He was buried with honor. He was noble. He was pure. He was faithful. He died for duty. He lives in memory. Chapter 31, Chester A. Arthur. Chester A. Arthur was the 21st president. He succeeded Garfield. He was vice president. He was born in Vermont. He was educated. He studied law. He lived in New York. He held office. He was collector of the port. He was removed by Hayes. He was nominated for balance. He was elected. He became president. He surprised the people. He was dignified. He was refined. He was honest. He favored reform. He signed the civil service law. He appointed a commission. He enforced the rules. He stood for merit. He opposed corruption. He was moderate. He was wise. He had good judgment. He improved the Navy. He favored rivers and harbors. He vetoed extravagance. He had good taste. He lived well. He entertained freely. He was courteous. He was popular. He sought nomination. He failed. He retired in 1885. He died in 1886. He had risen with duty. He had gained respect. He had kept his honor. Chapter 32, Grover Cleveland. Grover Cleveland was the 22nd president. He was a Democrat. He was born in New Jersey. He lived in New York. He studied law. He became a lawyer. He was mayor of Buffalo. He was governor of New York. He was honest. He was brave. He vetoed bad bills. He opposed rings. He favored reform. He gained fame. He was nominated in 1884. He was elected. He defeated Blaine. He was the first Democrat since Buchanan. He took office in 1885. He worked hard. He studied questions. He sent many vetoes. He was independent. He offended politicians. He pleased the people. He urged economy. He watched pensions. He was called hard. He was really just. He stood for the right. He lost friends. He kept his conscience. He favored tariff reform. He wrote a bold message. He alarmed interests. He fought monopoly. He made enemies. He was defeated in 1888. He went out in 1889. He lived quietly. He was nominated again. He was elected in 1892. He was the only man so honored. He took office in 1893. The panic came. Banks failed. Business stopped. Men were ruined. He stood firm. He repealed the silver law. He upheld gold. He favored sound money. He offended free silver men. He kept the faith. He put down strikes. He enforced law. He was criticized. He was courageous. He did not seek favor. He left office in 1897. He retired. He wrote little. He spoke little. He lived in Princeton. He died in 1908. He was honest. He was faithful. He was strong. He loved his country. Chapter 33. Benjamin Harrison. Benjamin Harrison was the 23rd president. He was a Republican. He was born in Ohio. He lived in Indiana. He was well educated. He studied law. He entered politics. He was a soldier. He fought in the Civil War. He became a brigadier general. He was elected to the Senate. He was nominated in 1888. He was elected. He defeated Cleveland. He took office in 1889. He was dignified. He was able. He was patriotic. He favored protection. He signed the McKinley Tariff. It raised duties. It helped manufacturers. It hurt consumers. He favored pensions. He signed the Dependent Pension Bill. He enlarged the rolls. He increased the cost. He favored silver. He signed the Silver Purchase Act. It pleased the West. It alarmed the East. He built up the Navy. He favored foreign policy. He called the Pan-American Congress. He extended influence. He stood for union. He was renominated. He was defeated. Cleveland returned. Harrison retired. He went back to Indianapolis. He practiced law. He wrote. He spoke. He was respected. He was upright. He was earnest. He died in 1901. He was the grandson of a president. He honored the name. He left a good record. Chapter 34. William McKinley. William McKinley was the 24th president. He was a Republican. He was born in Ohio. He was well educated. He taught school. He studied law. He became a lawyer. He entered the army. He fought in the Civil War. He was brave. He rose to major. He entered politics. He was in Congress. He was a leader. He favored protection. He framed the McKinley Tariff. It was high. It pleased manufacturers. It raised prices. It caused revolt. He was defeated. He was elected governor. He served well. He was nominated in 1896. He was elected. He defeated Bryan. He took office in 1897. He favored sound money. He stood for gold. He passed the Dingley Tariff. It raised duties again. It protected home industry. He faced war with Spain. Cuba rebelled. The Maine was sunk. The people demanded action. He hesitated. He tried peace. He urged delay. He sent ultimatum. He declared war. He called for troops. He sent ships. Dewey sailed to Manila. He destroyed the fleet. He took the city. Sampson watched Havana. Schley caught Cervera. He destroyed the fleet. Shafter landed at Santiago. He stormed San Juan. He captured the city. The war ended. Spain gave up Cuba. She yielded Puerto Rico. She ceded the Philippines. She received money. The treaty was signed. The country rejoiced. The president was praised. He took the islands. He promised freedom. He called for patience. He urged education. He stood for humanity. He was renominated. He was re-elected. He defeated Bryan again. He entered on a new term. He favored reciprocity. He urged trade. He sought peace. He went to Buffalo. He made a speech. He shook hands. He stood in a hall. He was shot. A hand had struck. A bullet had sped. The assassin was an anarchist. The wound was mortal. He lingered. He suffered. He was patient. He said, "It is God's way." He died. The people wept. The world mourned. He was good. He was gentle. He was faithful. He was patriotic. He was brave. He gave his life. He lives in memory. Chapter 35. The Flag of the Republic. The flag is the symbol of the nation. It stands for the Union. It stands for liberty. It stands for equality. It stands for law. It stands for progress. It is loved by the people. It is honored by the world. It was born in revolution. It rose with the republic. It has grown with the states. It has changed with time. It began with 13 stars. It has now 45. Each star is a state. Each stripe is a memory. Each color is a meaning. The red is for courage. The white is for purity. The blue is for loyalty. It waves on land. It floats on sea. It flies on schoolhouses. It guards the capital. It crowns the ship. It marks the camp. It leads the charge. It drapes the bier. It honors the grave. It is never lowered. It is never dishonored. It has gone far. It has done much. It has fought tyranny. It has freed the slave. It has saved the Union. It has sheltered the weak. It has helped the world. It stands for peace. It is ready for war. It welcomes the stranger. It protects the exile. It defies the foe. It gladdens the friend. It is a flag of light. It is a flag of hope. It means the republic. It means the people. It means the future. It means the world. Long may it wave.
If you found this video insightful and engaging, don't forget to give it a like to support the channel. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming historical videos. Feel free to leave a comment below with your thoughts or suggestions for future topics. Thank you for watching.